bits of paper. It is lots of extra effort. But organisations have to pay special attention to how they keep records. And you have to do that before you even start your project. So many organisations learn by doing, and they get the idea of what the kinds of documents they need towards the end of the contract. And they're always trying to catch up. So then they have the pressure of producing the final report and the financial part of that report. And often it's a very difficult process because they're trying to recover documents from activities and things that went on 6 months ago or a year ago. So attention to the how you keep records and how you then use those documents in the reporting. That's another key area. So in terms of any types of training, you make sure you cover those areas thoroughly. So I've got a few comments on those three things. Firstly, modifying the contract. Well, I think on those bits of paper there were some do's and don'ts which referred to this, really. It's what you can and you cannot change. Again, the underlying principle here is that under EU rules, if there's an open call for proposals, it's a competitive process. And as an organisation, you put forward a proposal of how you're going to achieve some objectives. And you're doing it in a competitive fashion. So you will be awarded a grant rather than some other organisation because it is understood that you are best able to deliver on what you say you can. So it's a competition. So you cannot change. The EU will not let you change your contract easily because if there are major changes, basically it can promote unfair competition. Because you have been given the grant on the basis of what you proposed. If then there's going to be big changes, then that changes the whole situation. And someone who didn't get a grant, they're able to complain later. You know, they can say, hey, this organisation, you gave them a grant, and they completely changed the project, and their project's now like our project, but we didn't get a grant. So it's all this issue about fair competition. This is why the contracting authority is strict on what you can change and not change. It's to do with this principle. Even though those people who are in the contracting authority very often don't really put it across in that way. They are, as they tend to be bureaucrats, they're just interested in the small details and they lose the big picture. But I think you need to make CSOs aware of this big picture. So basically we know that these are the small changes where you're just providing information about them, and on that side it's the big changes where there's an addendum to the contract. So the legal document actually goes through a change. In country by country, the way in which these minor changes are interpreted might be different. These are the changes whereby you're required to inform the contracting authority that the change has happened, but you don't need to wait for the approval. But there is some practice in countries, and I'll be interested to hear your opinion about this, your experience, where even for minor changes, sometimes contracting authorities want to give approval. In Turkey, the contracting authority often asks for, suggests there has to be written approval of some of these issues, the small things. The argument that I've heard from the contracting authority on this is again to try to introduce particular practices and to protect the grant beneficiary. Because many grant beneficiaries, if it's their first time they have a grant, they're not aware that at the end of the process, the contracting authority will make a judgment of what is an eligible cost or what is not eligible. And if they've made changes and done things in their projects, and at the end the contracting authority decides that something was not an eligible cost, they will not get that money back. So in a way, the contracting authority is trying to protect the NGO. It's in their interest to make them work harder to get approval in order that they don't get a surprise at the end of the contract, that they get their money back. But the way, from my experience, the way in which that is done in Turkey as a protection or as a favour to the CSO doesn't come across very well, and it's often seen as interference and too much bureaucracy. Okay, just a few things about procurement. As the slide says, there are things that you really must do, even though Prague are guidelines. If you are not following Prague in terms of procurement and using the particular templates which the EU provides and tendering for services or goods the way in which you suggested, of course, as an organisation, you run the risk of not getting your money, of being reimbursed for the costs. So it's really important to stress that those guidelines really should be followed, particularly in terms of the templates and the time periods used for the procurement processes. The Prague says lots of stuff, and when you go through Prague and have your walk through Prague and get to understand it, pick out some of these topics. Look to see what Prague says on these subjects, because on a lot of projects there's not a big amount of a procurement, and often there aren't big complicated issues. But if you have a project where there is a lot of procurement, particularly of items above 10,000 euros, you really need to be very clear on some of these issues. And I'm sure in terms of the country of origin, you've probably all struggled on this one. Yes. But do you find a way around it? Does the contracting authority support you in?
Yes, contacting them, explaining them.
So again, we're not going to go through these details, but this is just to flag up these issues, and when you're helping others, these are the things they need to be aware of. That if you're going to buy a piece of equipment, you can't just go to your local shop and buy it. There's a whole process involved in it, and make sure that organisations understand what they can and cannot do on these things. In Prague and in lots of places, you'll often see this table which explains what procedures need to be followed according to the value of the tender. So basically, for the different types of contracts, for service, supply and works contracts, the bottom line here is that if your procurement is less than 10,000, it's a simple process. You literally do just walk into the shop and you buy whatever you need to buy. It's a single tender. However, you have to be careful. Again, it depends on your type of the project and how much procurement that you're doing. You cannot break down your procurement to deliberately avoid not going over 10,000 euros. If clearly you are buying some supplies as a lot, you have to do a tender. You can't deliberately break down the purchase in order to avoid the 10,000. The key to a lot of this is the kind of records you keep and the documentation and what you have in your tender dossier of how you do your tendering. As long as you maintain appropriate records and try to put as much information as possible. So if you are working in a restricted marketplace and there isn't so much choice, you still need to get the bits of paper which show that that is the case. There has to be some kind of simple market survey which will show these things. So you cannot make assumptions and just say, well, we know it's difficult, we're going to have to do it like this. Everything has to be documented. There has to be pieces of paper from third parties which show that what you're saying is true, basically.